They laugh when they say it, but something in your stomach twists. Not because it was funny, but because it was true, and they knew it, and they said it anyway. And after they come up with phrases like, "You're so sensitive," "Relax, it's just a joke," "Can't you take a little fun?" But it wasn't fun, it was surgical. The kind of sentence that doesn't just land, it opens. A scalpel disguised as a smile, a trauma delivered in a tone meant to make you question your sanity. That's not a joke, that's psychological warfare wearing clown paint. Sigmund Freud named it parapraxis. You might know it better as a Freudian slip, but here's the part you don't know. Sometimes the slip isn't accidental. Sometimes the slip is weaponized. Buried truth wearing a laugh track. Repressed resentment served as humor, because when someone jokes like that, they are not trying to be funny. They are trying to tell you who they are without being held responsible for it. And if you ignore it, if you explain it away, if you keep giving them another pass, you become the punchline. Here's the brutal truth. Freud believed that the unconscious never jokes. It leaks. It reveals. It confesses. So when someone accidentally mocks your body, your fears, your past, your deepest insecurity, and then laughs, that's not lighthearted. That's a leak. That's the unconscious oozing out through a smile. And if you felt hurt by it, you weren't overreacting. You were hearing something they didn't even know they said. Or worse, they did. Because every joke has a shadow, and some shadows are shaped like shame, some like control, some like buried rage that never had permission to speak until now. Freud once said the unconscious is structured like a language. And what is language if not the vehicle for our pain when we've been told we're not allowed to feel it? So the joke becomes a loophole. The insult gets immunity. The cruelty wears comedy like camouflage. And it always sounds the same. "I didn't mean it like that." "God, can't you take a joke? You're just too emotional." But underneath that, underneath the laugh, is a mirror, a glimpse into what they really think, what they really feel, what they're dying to say but too afraid to own. So instead, they wrap it in sarcasm. They lace it with irony. They serve the truth, then gaslight you for tasting it. And somewhere in you, something freezes. You feel the joke hit you in a place too specific to be random, like a sniper bullet that found the softest part of your past. You don't know whether to laugh, cry, or leave. So you sit there, smiling, dying, because if you call it out, you'll be difficult. If you speak up, you'll be too intense. If you leave, you're too dramatic. So you stay. And now the silence becomes permission. They make the joke again, louder this time, more people around. And you pretend to laugh because God forbid you ruin the vibe. But what you're really doing is swallowing a piece of yourself, making yourself smaller to fit inside someone else's ego. And that's not strength, that's survival. That's the child in you still trying to avoid punishment for taking things too personally. Because somewhere in your story you learned that pain is inconvenient, that sensitivity is weakness, that you should always assume they didn't mean it. But what if they did? What if the unconscious doesn't make mistakes? What if the joke was the only way they felt safe enough to tell you how much they secretly envy, resent you, or want to cut you down? Freud called it displacement, the redirecting of emotion from its original target to a safer one. They can't stand up to their boss, so they make jokes about your ambition. They feel insecure in their own body, so they tease you for gaining weight. They feel abandoned by someone else, so they call you needy for wanting connection. They joke, but the joke is never really about you. It's about what you activate in them. And instead of feeling it, instead of confronting it, they disguise it. They turn their emotion into entertainment. They make you doubt your reality so they don't have to feel their own. It's not just unkind, it's unclean. It's the psychic equivalent of handing you their dirty laundry and calling it a gift. You deserve to ask, why is this funny to you? Why is my pain your punchline? Why do I feel humiliated when you laugh? And if you're afraid to ask that, you're not overreacting. You're remembering. You're remembering what it felt like the first time someone did this to you. Maybe when you were too small to understand it. Maybe when the laughter felt like love. When being the butt of the joke felt better than being invisible. But you're not a child anymore. And the game isn't cute now. It's corrosive. Because every joke that lands like a scar rewrites your nervous system. It teaches your body not to flinch at disrespect, to tolerate mockery, to welcome people who hurt you as long as they do it with a smile. But here's the truth they don't want you to realize. If you don't laugh, if you don't play along, if you say, "That wasn't funny to me," you break the spell. You force them to own it. You make the unconscious conscious. And most people don't want that. They'd rather hide behind humor than sit in their own shame. Because once it's spoken, once the mask slips, they have to face what they've been burying for years. That they've been hurting people in the name of being funny. And now they can't laugh it off in the stillness of what they really feel. Because humor for them is anesthesia. Not warmth, not wit, but numbing. It's how they avoid their own emotional excavation, by digging into you instead. But here's where it gets darker. Sometimes these jokes aren't just accidental eruption. Sometimes they're calculated tests. They're watching your reaction, measuring your tolerance, seeing how far they can go before you flinch, before you break. It's not a joke, it's a map, a carefully drawn path to where you are most vulnerable. And once they find it, they mark it. And they return, not to heal it, not to understand it, but to keep pressing, to make sure you never forget who has the power to make you feel small. Freud might have called it sadism wrapped in jest. You call it that one friend who always takes it too far. But it's deeper than that. This is a defense mechanism in action. Humor as hostility, a psychic pressure valve, too cowardly to confront their shadow, so they make a joke, watch you squirm, and call it banter. It's not banter, it's a betrayal of intimacy, a way to say, "I see the wound in you," without the burden of compassion. And if you've stayed close to someone like this, if you've laughed along, even when it gutted you, you need to ask yourself, what part of me believes I deserve this? Because that's the real trap. The unconscious isn't just theirs, it's yours too. Maybe you grew up in a home where love wore a mask, where affection came with sarcasm, where no one ever said, "I'm proud of you," but they roasted you until you cried. And somewhere along the way, you confused cruelty for closeness. You mistook emotional assault for attention. You started to believe that pain was the price you pay to belong. So now you laugh at things that kill you. You call it thick skin, you call it being chill, but your inner child is screaming, because jokes don't have to hurt. Laughter doesn't have to humiliate. You don't have to sit there, teeth clenched, pretending to enjoy being emotionally stripped for sport. You are allowed to say, "That wasn't okay. That wasn't funny. That felt like a wound, not a wink." But here's the part that's going to hurt. When you start naming it, when you stop laughing, some people will leave. They'll call you too sensitive, too serious, too much. Because you stopped being easy to manipulate. You stopped offering your nervous system as a playground for someone else's undealt with shame. You stopped apologizing for wanting kindness with your connection, respect with your relationships, safety with your sense of humor. And those who joke like this, the ones who pierce and pretend, they don't want you to wake up. Because when you do, you stop dancing for their approval. You stop bleeding just to keep the peace. You stop letting people treat your dignity like it's up for auction in every conversation. This is not about being fun. This is about being free, free from the mental gymnastics, the quiet rationalizations, the internal dialogue that sounds like, "Maybe I'm just too emotional. Maybe they didn't mean it. Maybe I'm the problem." No, you are not the problem. You're just the first one in the room to feel the sting beneath the sentence. The truth hidden beneath the timing, the intent buried inside the inflection. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Freud taught us that what we repress doesn't disappear. It returns, distorted, sneaky, lethal. And these jokes, they're often the first return, the first knock on the door from someone's unfelt rage, unsaid truth, or unloved shame. But that doesn't make it your burden to carry. That doesn't mean you have to stand there smiling while someone vomits their shadow into your soul and calls it a joke. You don't owe them a laugh. You don't owe them silence. You don't owe them access. Some people joke like this because it's the only language they know. But just because they were never taught tenderness doesn't mean you owe them your tolerance. Let them learn. Let them lose you. Let them sit with the silence that follows a joke you no longer accept. Because sometimes the greatest act of self-respect is the refusal to laugh at your own dehumanization. And when you stop laughing, they'll hear it, loud and clear. You found the line, and you chose to draw it not in sand but in stone. Because from now on, every joke costs something, and not everyone gets to collect. Let's talk about the part of you that stays. That sits through the joke, that swallows the sting. That hears the words, feels the knife twist behind the smile, and does nothing. Not because you're weak, but because your nervous system learned long ago that speaking up meant danger. Maybe your father joked like this, or your mother made comments that felt like praise until you noticed they only came after a mistake. Maybe it was a sibling, a teacher, a partner, someone you needed love from who gave you sarcasm instead. So you learned to brace for impact and laugh with the one who hurt you. Because if you laughed, you were part of the pack. If you laughed, you weren't the one being targeted, you were in on it. But the joke was always on you. Because every time you laughed at your own humiliation, you weren't surviving. You were disappearing, a little more each time. And now you wonder why your voice trembles when you try to speak your truth. Why your chest tightens when someone says, "I was just kidding." Why you feel like you need permission to get angry at something that hurt you. It's not immaturity. It's not oversensitivity. It's conditioning. Freud called it the return of the repressed. But to you, it feels like this moment, right now, when someone says something playful and your body freezes. Your lips curl upward, but your gut drops like an elevator cut from its cables. That drop, it's the truth, and you've been ignoring it for years. Because being easygoing kept the peace. Because being cool got you invited. Because being the person who can take a joke made you feel like you belong. But what you really belonged to was your own betrayal. And now you're here, alone with this realization, realizing that maybe you've been laughing at yourself so no one else would do it first. But let me say this, with no poetry, no performance, no metaphor, you deserve better. You deserve relationships where laughter feels like light, not a scalpel. You deserve to be around people who ask, "Did that hurt?" instead of, "Can't you take a joke?" You deserve to trust your instincts when something doesn't feel right, without having to turn it into a performance for someone else's comfort. You deserve to walk away the first time someone uses humor to erode your worth. Because here's the hidden cost of staying. You begin to forget who you are when you're not bracing. You lose the parts of yourself that are soft and curious and sacred. You start editing your laughter, curating your presence, censoring your own aliveness. And the longer you stay, the harder it becomes to remember what it felt like to be safe. That's what's on the line here. Not pride, not ego, but safety. Psychological safety, emotional safety, spiritual safety. So when someone jokes like this, and your body tightens, listen to that. That's not paranoia. That's not overthinking. That's your nervous system whispering, "This isn't love." And if that's not enough to walk away, let me give you this. Every time you let someone cross the line and call it comedy, you teach them how to keep doing it. But every time you say, "That wasn't okay," you teach your inner child something too. That the game is over. That the rules have changed. That you are no longer for sale to people who trade in shame. And when you cut them off, not with rage, not with drama, but with calm, quiet clarity, you don't just protect yourself, you reclaim yourself. Because the real punchline is this: the people who joke like that, they only win when you keep playing. And you're not laughing anymore, you're leaving. See, cutting someone off isn't just about removing them, it's about removing their voice from inside you. Because long after they leave your life, their words echo. You hear them when you try on that outfit, when you speak up at work, when you're vulnerable in love. They live in the quiet after you make a mistake, in the silence before the apology that never comes. That's the final layer. It's not just what they said, it's what you started saying to yourself because of them. And Freud would say, the superego learned to whisper in their voice. What started as their sarcasm became your self-criticism. Their "just kidding" became your "I'm just not good enough." Their little digs got planted like seeds, and you watered them with your doubt until they grew into truths. But here's the secret. What was planted can be uprooted, not with affirmation, not with empty positivity, but with truth. The kind of truth that hurts when you say it. The kind that cracks open the armor you built to survive. And here it is, it wasn't a joke. It was emotional violence dressed in laughter. You weren't too sensitive, you were attuned. You felt what was being done and you were right. It didn't make you stronger, it made you scared to trust yourself. It wasn't just how they are. It was a choice, a performance, a mask for cruelty. And now you get to choose. Not just to cut them off, but to cut the cord between who they said you are and who you actually are. That's the liberation Freud could only hint at, the moment when unconscious suffering is brought into the light of awareness. Not to relive it, but to release it. So here's the real work. Start watching the jokes you tell yourself, the little insults that sound like facts, the inner voice that shrinks you before anyone else gets the chance. Challenge it, interrupt it, ask it, who taught you to speak to me like that? And if the answer is someone who once made you laugh while you bled on the inside, then you know exactly what to do. Because some people aren't meant to be confronted. They're meant to be removed, and the most powerful closure isn't a dramatic exit. It's a silent boundary that never needs to be explained. So if someone jokes like this and your chest tightens and your heart sinks and something in you screams, "Not again," listen, don't defend, don't decode, don't delay, just leave. And in your absence, let them feel the silence where your laughter used to be. Because you are not entertainment. You are not a punchline. You are not an emotional scratching post for the insecure and the cruel. You are a cathedral of memory, a monument to what you've survived, a voice that deserves to be heard without fear. And now you're free. You're not laughing anymore, you're healing. And that is no joke. If this spoke to you, don't keep it inside. Comment, share. Let someone else know they're not imagining it, because sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who get away with it by making you laugh while you're breaking. But not anymore. Not here, not you.